Alexander of Macedon by Harold Lamb continues, Part 3, and Chapter 16, River of the Sea and River of the Sands. What the army as a whole thought of the massacre is recorded by no one, but it is noticeable that this year Alexandros had to order the forces into action several times and had to lead the way himself more than once. At the city of Karush, where a high stone wall defied the engines, he and Croctorus led an assault along the bed of a river, shallow in the midsummer heat, that traversed the city, and here he was badly wounded in the head by a heavy stone, so that for some time afterward he could not see well. Croctorus also was laid out by an arrow, for here in the north the Macedonians found themselves in more open country along the caravan route that led back to the Caspian. They also found themselves operating against the fine horse archers, the Parthians of Bactria and Solvit. And here, for many months, the Macedonians could make no progress. This was no orderly campaigning. Like that of the Mediterranean coast, it was merciless conflict for survival. The horsemen of northern Asia proved to be too swift for the Westerners to overtake in pursuit. The Macedonians fell back on fighting and maneuvering, staging a siege of one city while they struck at another strong point elsewhere at night. It helped them to pinch off the towns, where several times Alexandros ordered execution of all the men taken inside, but it did not help them to hold the towns once taken. Alexandros' scheme of strengthening colonies with garrisons did not work out against organized resistance. It was necessary to destroy the armed forces opposing him. By degrees, he identified the head of this successful resistance, a high-born Mede, Spitama, very ancient name that predates Zarathustra, by the way, an officer of the former Iranian army. He rallied the forces of the steppes around him. More than that, he seemed to be drawing in the formidable Scythian horsemen from further north, and for a while Spitama outmatched the Macedonians at their own maneuvering. Apparently, Alexandros tried to change the equipment of his cavalry, lightening it to cope with the splendid Bactrians. He accomplished little by this. Then he began to induce the plains dwellers to settle in his new colonies. When he appeared among these northerners, he put on the long robe-like coat, the scarf, and the wide-sleeved jacket of the Persian great kings. Informers told him that Spitama had been seen wearing the royal tiara, which might have been the real one, taken from Darayavaush. He has raised his cap on high, they laughed. The tiara was the high conical headgear, imitated from the cylindrical headdress of the last Babylonian kings. Whatever the Macedonians did, Spitama seemed able to do better, until Alexandros, recovering from his wound, determined to end the frittering away of the Macedonian strength, and advanced into the north, towards the oncoming Scythians. His column circled the desert of black sands, striking into the open Loess region, where the red conglomerate stood in treeless masses as if carved by the hands of men. From this Loess a haze of dust arose at the wind's touch. At sunset the whole land was the color of blood, and Aristander did not like the looks of that. To avoid the horsemen of the plain, Alexandros moved eastward into the foothills of a small river lined by groves of fruit trees. Here, at the city of Maracund, modern Samarkand, he held a strong garrison, occupying the stone citadel, and pushed on, feeling For the Scythians, he went on in spite of the tradition that Kurush had gone from Maracond to his death at the hands of the Scythians. So they came to the second river they had been searching for, the River of the Sands. They were now slightly north of the main mass of the earth's top that the people here named the Hindu or Mount of India. In the clear atmosphere, they could make out the highest peaks beyond them, and to the right, here beside the River of the Sands, the Surdarya, or Sur anyways, they started work on the northernmost Alexandria. They had to fortify the site, being under attack the while the water was had in the muddy river. Across it appeared the outposts of the dreaded Scythians, horsemen armed with long swords and strangely curved bows, who jeered at the Macedonians from across the water barrier while they grazed their horses. Masses of them began to arrive. It did not seem to the Macedonians that this could be the hoped-for river, flowing out of paradise. To make this situation worse, couriers brought up word that the large garrison at Maracond had been driven into the citadel, which Spitama, who seemed to be everywhere, Alexandros was not, had begun to besiege. To retreat south would be an invitation to the assembling Scythians to cross the river and follow. To cross this River of the Sands themselves would be to leave the vast area in their rear to Spitama's tender mercy. They were fairly caught between two horns of a dilemma. As the philosophers pointed out, the brigadiers began to ponder that network of communications behind them, defended only by isolated garrisons and task forces. The more they pondered, the more disconsolate they became. It was as if they had wound their way through a labyrinth, unwinding a thread as a guide behind them. If that thread should be broken, these staff officers had no illusions about the Minotaurs, now waiting to rush upon them in this labyrinth of mountains and desert. They recalled that Scythae, the Scythians, were reputed to be the strongest of all the peoples in Asia. As far west as the steppes of Black Earth, near the Balkans, these Scythians roamed and brought gold jewelry for their wives from the Greek artisans of the Euxine Sea. Darius I had been humbled by them and driven out before he had invaded Greece. Somewhere around this river, the mighty Kurush had been slain by them. With their long braided hair, baggy trousers, these barbarians looked like beasts atop their shaggy horses. Well, cold mountains of Eurasia, of course they needed shaggy horses to deal with the cold. No aspect of the situation encouraged the staff officers, and they took pains to let the aging Aristander, the omen-taker, hear their decisions. And Alexandros, they knew, was in no condition to lead an army just now. That stone crushing against the base of his skull had numbed his mind for many days. Although he could see clearly again, he had agonizing headaches, which he tried to relieve by drinking the last of the supply of wine. Well, just like the issue with sleeping, that's going to make things worse overall, isn't that? Either this wine or the muddy river water had weakened him with dysentery. Alexandros himself said little to them, except to urge haste in fortifying the new outpost city. He said it would serve as a bridgehead into these steppes, as a protection against the nomadic peoples. Obviously, however, he was disappointed. He had reached, by a tremendous effort, the River of Sands near its headwaters, hoping as usual to orient the army by tracing the sources of the riverbank into the mountains, the mass of the Hindiku. But these sources lay at unguessed heights above him. He felt no friendly aspect in this northern land. The sun itself made its arc across the sky far behind him. No one around him could recall a legend that even Heracles or Dionysos had penetrated this region before them. They all knew that the limits reached by the exploring Argonauts lay far back towards the setting sun. Meanwhile, the masses of Scythians across the water grew greater daily. The stone wall of the newest Alexandria rose slowly, in spite of the efforts of Dionysus' engineers, and something had to be done to relieve Samarkand. Alexandros detached a strong column, a squadron of companions, with 2 regiments of allied horse and foot, about 2,400 men in all, under command of a brigadier named Caranus, and he ordered the glum Alexandros to take the omens for a crossing of the river. If there was nothing encouraging in that situation, he might be able to show the men a good sign from the taking of the omens. Aristander obeyed and reported that the liver of the slain sheep showed clear marking of ill fortune if the army advanced over an obstacle. Hearing this, Alexandros turned away, angered and silent. He sent back word for the soothsayer to repeat the test. "If you have no faith in me," Aristander replied, "find another to do your bidding." "Take the omens again," Alexandros ordered. A second sheep was opened and its liver examined. Having had the opportunity to ponder the crisis, Aristander reported this time that the army might cross safely, but misfortune would come to Alexandros. "I'd rather meet with whatever it is," the commander retorted, "that stay here longer to be made a laughingstock by the barbarians." "Take care," the old man cried, "to heed the portents of the entities. They will not change their intentions because of your wishes." And their wishes aren't exactly the same thing as whatever the soothsayers free associate are direct, like a sage. But if you're honest about it, it's not soothsaying. Okay, I've perhaps confused that for some people, but the army was not reassured by this argument between the diviner and the commander. But the Scythians were puzzled by what the Macedonians did next. As soon as the defenses of the city could be considered adequate, the sick, who had served their time, were quartered inside, with the farmers of the countryside, while the engineers turned to building rafts and floats. Also series of gastrophetes, the new oversized mechanical crossbow, were set up along the riverbank. They were not operators until the hour of crossing. Meanwhile, Scythian archers had amused themselves trying to shoot across an extreme range for a handbow. To this drooping fire, the Macedonians paid no attention. Then, either to encourage his troops or to bewilder the Scythians, Alexandros staged one of his eccentric shows, pouring libations into the river of the sands, and holding field sports and horse races between the new Alexandria and the river. The accompaniment of music, naturally the Scythians crowded closer to the far bank to watch and jeer at the extraordinary performance. And was it K-Bar? And anyways, sometimes you need to really focus on what the army's going to face rather than entertainment. But people